Welcome back to our video series on how to develop your clinical practice through the promotion of interdisciplinary care at the intersection of faith and neuroscience. Today's talk is on the CPA Baseline Report, actually the second page, the clinical interpretation report of that 5-page HIPAA-compliant document. The clinical interpretation report page begins with a paragraph describing anxiety. The client's score from the NIH anxiety scale is presented. The normative data interpretation of the score is described as a percentile ranking. Next, that ranking is interpreted in terms of the percentage of people in the United States who report fewer or less severe or less frequent symptoms. The beauty of the NIH PROMIS tests is that they have been created to reflect everyday life in the United States. Depending on the test, usually between 1,500 and 2,000 people were sampled. This provides a wonderful opportunity for the client to compare himself or herself to how other people are doing. Part of the backstory is that the percentile rankings for each of the PROMIS measures are based on the normal curve. Theoretically, 68% of the people in the sample fall within one standard deviation from the median score. If the normal curve is symmetrical, the median score is also the mean or average score of everybody who's been tested. In percentage terms, this means that theoretically 34% are above the mean and 34% are below the mean, comprising 68% of the people who were tested. Now, these numbers are not precise. Every score, from a blood test score to a spelling test score to the score on a PROMIS questionnaire, has a true value and an error value. And in real life, with variables like anxiety and depression and sleep disturbance, normal curves are not perfectly symmetrical. So, should we just forget about the person's score as not having any meaning? No, that would be awfully disrespectful. The person took the time to expose herself by answering these questions as best she could, even though she doesn't know us. This takes an awful lot of trust and faith that we're going to use her data to actually help her. As people complete questionnaires like this, they justify their feelings of vulnerability and exposure by trusting that we're going to use the data to help them. So, how do we interpret the test results so that they can be helpful? A basic question would be, how high is too high a score? A rule of thumb is that scores one standard deviation above and below the mean are within the average range. Since the average range goes up to 34% above the mean, this means that the upper limit of the average range contains 84% of the scores. So the 85th percentile is slightly above the average range. I'm going to post another lesson on percentile rankings. This is as far as we can go into test statistics right now. What should we say if a person gives us a score that places him at the 90th percentile on the anxiety scale? We can say with reasonable confidence that he's above the average range and has more anxiety symptoms and that they're more severe and more frequent than the average person. Now, I don't leave it at that, of course, because I have additional information. What additional information do I have? There are 3 really big chunks of information that I need to keep in mind to help me interpret this particular score. The 3 chunks are the client's context within which the scores were obtained, the individual item responses, and the concurrent scores that gives us the profile. I'm going to talk with you briefly about each of these. First, let's consider the context within which the scores were obtained. This actually has important statistical relevance that's been proven time and again in both psychological tests and medical tests. As long as the person is actually asking for help, we need to take his or her responses as a communication that is a request for assistance. Conversely, if the person is there because their parents or their spouse or the court has forced them to participate, the test results are likely to communicate something else entirely. So for today, let's assume that the person has asked for help. He wants to tell you what's going on, but he's also ambivalent for a whole host of reasons. We're only going to learn about the reasons for his ambivalence after we begin a relationship in which he begins to trust us. So, if the person who completed the test has asked for help, interpret the test results as a starting point in a trusting relationship. Interact with him as if that's the case. I can't tell you how to do that because you already have your own style. But I can tell you that test results handled this way can be very useful in developing a trusting relationship. The second chunk of information that you have are the individual item responses, which is the next thing to look at after the score. The question to ask yourself, and using your own style to ask the client, is, what's driving the score? If the score is above the 84th percentile, what's caused the score to be above average? If the score is below the 16th percentile, what's caused the score to be unusually low? So, go through a few of the items that seem to have driven the score one way or the other. You give the client an opportunity to help you interpret the test results. What does this do? Well, it's a test of whether or not you can cooperate with each other. It's a test of whether or not you can trust each other. It's a test of whether or not you can communicate with each other. Of course, you know that you can, but this is an opportunity for you to demonstrate this to the client. The third chunk of information that you have are the other test results. In this battery, there's a general statistical relationship that you can look for among the three PROMIS measures using their percentile scores. And you can also compare these with the quality of life measure. We call this the clinical profile. That's why they're presented together on the clinical interpretation report page. In graduate school, I teach a full semester class on how to interpret a clinical profile. I can't give you an easy answer because it's a very complex issue, but I can tell you that the more you use a test battery, the better you are training your brain to look for significant indicators in the profile. So, make a commitment to yourself and to your clients to spend time with your clients on this page. In the process of helping your individual client, you're also helping your brain to develop its ability to help future clients. That's the whole idea behind the phrase such as a counselor's practice or a doctor's practice. We humbly admit that we're always learning. The clinical interpretation report page can become a powerful teaching tool for yourself while you simultaneously provide benefit to the client who's sitting in front of you and to all of your future clients. So for the next part of the video lesson series, we're going to stay on this page and take a look at depression, the NIH depression measure, and how to interpret those scores.